Undisputed Music Legends podcast is all about giving props to our music legends now while they're alive. And my guest today is not only composing and developing this music, all sorts of music in fact, he's enabling others to play it, but he's also aligning that music to tell the story of who we are as black people. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it, to my telling it as it is in word and song mantra that I insist is my ethos. This is the personal history of composer Gary Washington and his ancestors, and it's a celebration of the wider African diaspora during this time, who fought and resisted enslavement at every step and until the very end. And he's here to tell us more. Gary Washington, aka the Urban Cellist, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Audrey. It's a pleasure to be here. I've known about your show for, I could say, years now, and I've always wanted to be on it. So, yeah.
I've known about you for a few years now. I was mentioning in the show a few weeks ago with Toby Rathbone, who is he is the big program worker for the Manchester Jazz Festival. And we were actually talking about you and the fact that I've seen your journey. I've seen the transition. This is year 3. And each year it's been a pleasure, I have to say. And each year there has been a development. But before we get stuck into all of that, just take me back, because obviously I can hear your accent. I've talked about New Orleans. So what brought you to Manchester in the first place?
Um, well, first, I guess, it's two things. There was this woman I was dating, and it was also music. So, those two together. I did a tour in the UK 2019, and I dug it, and I just saw certain opportunities that I could like explore here on a musical level. So
Okay.
yeah,
Well, there are two good reasons. Love and music. I couldn't think of two better reasons, actually. But I'm going to take you back even further, Gary, because as I say, I can hear that accent. So tell me, what was it that actually got you into music in the first place?
my father, my dad, he played the bass guitar and the tuba in high school. So he would always talk about music. He was a lover of music, and he would talk about it with such passion. It just put it in me, or maybe I just naturally had the passion, and we just sort of connected with through it. But yeah, we both always loved music.
When you say he played, do you mean he played for himself or he played professionally?
He didn't play professionally. My uncles have a band. Well, yeah, they still have it. My father's deceased now, but he like started that band with my uncles, and that band still gets up today, still from all those years. And I would hear about stories of them playing, like, my uncle played the piano, uncle played drums and guitars and bass, and I would always hear my dad talk about my uncles. So I always like looked up to my uncles because they were in like New Jersey, and at the time I was in South Carolina, so I didn't really get to see them very often, but I would just hear about them. So
Okay.
yeah,
Well, those stories are always the strongest stories, and when they're told with love and passion, and it's something that your dad is into at the same time, I suppose that makes it even more real. But when did you think to yourself, do you know what? There's something in this for me. Seriously, I'm not talking about just loving it and having a chat with your dad. I'm talking about Gary Washington being able to say something through
yeah.
the medium of music.
Well, it was three stages for me with music. It was like at first when when I first picked up the instrument, I knew that I was very serious. Like I just knew it. You couldn't. I just knew it. And then there was the time when I got jumped, and then it was when I entered in New Orleans. So those are 3 separate occasions. So obviously I picked the instrument up. I was like, yes, this is it. I don't need to know anything else. Like, and then when I got jumped, I was hanging out in the streets. Like, basically, I had these friends, and we had these little like, I guess you would call it like, uh, just groups of people that cling to each other. I wouldn't call it a gang, but I would just say like, just certain cliques, and
Oh,
certain
posse.
cliques.
Yeah.
And this one guy was fighting this one guy, and he was getting jumped. I jumped in and I turned the tide of the fight. I was always a good fighter because I have a big brother and then I have big cousins. So I was always like, I was good at fighting, strong. So, but the guy was like, yeah, man, we're gonna jump you, man. My cousin's gonna come from New York. And I'm like, yo, well, you can, but I have my friends as well. So it's like, but then his friends came and I got jumped and it was really bad. But none of my friends came to like support me. And that was really hurtful. And then I was really beat up. And yeah, long story short,
Sorry, forgive me, Gary. I mean, it's easy to say, not easy to say, obviously, it's a traumatic story. But when you say none of your friends came to support you, did your friends know that you needed supported? Did they know that this was going to happen? Was it like you're making it sound like West Side Story, even?
well, yeah, I love that music.
Me too.
I think it's more of I think it was more of they knew about it, but I guess it just wasn't that big of a deal to them, like, as it was for me,
Okay.
because, as a kid, you know, I had my father and my mother in my life, but that was definitely um that was complicated. But when you form these social groups as a kid, even as an adult, but it's particularly as a kid, it's like it's very traumatic when like you think people are your friends and all of a sudden like it turns out that maybe they don't see certain things the way you see it and they can't support you in the way that you feel that you want them to. It's because you're looking for that like camaraderie as a kid. You don't want to be left out. You don't want to sit at the lunch table by yourself as a kid because it's different as an adult. I mean, yeah, it might be traumatic as a adult in a way, but as a kid it's different. And I think after that time period, that's when I was like, you know what? Like, I'm gonna pour myself into my craft. Um, and then I went through a whole lot of other stuff in my childhood that sort of cemented that. Like I'm gonna. This is like my. Not only is what I want to do with my career. This is like my therapy. This is my safe space. This is where I can express myself and be vulnerable and put my emotions into this. And that's when that started to really, I mean, it happened before. I used to write poems and but after that happened, I would just I remember when I didn't have an instrument, before I had my own cello, I used to air play. I used to just like put like a trash can here, put like a broom on it, and just put a pencil in my hand and just air play, just I just wanted to like keep my chops up. And then I remember when I got my first cello, I used to cut grass and I used to just knock on doors, cut grass. Hey, do you want your grass cut? Save the money. And then this one teacher, Mr. Mitchell, he was like, Mr. Washington, sir, what is that? I said, this is a cello. He said, I'm going to help you buy one. And he drove like at least a mile and a half, even 2 miles, came to my house, put like $250 in my hand,
How old are
and
you then? How old are we now, Gary?
even know, man, I was 14, 15.
So it's almost like you've had teachers, and it's like you've had these little guardian angels, if you like, dipping in and out of your life, supporting you. I say in all of these things, it's one thing having ability, it's one thing having capability, but you absolutely need somebody on your side. You need somebody on your side to
Definitely.
allow you access in. And it sounds to me that even by the age of 14, you've talked about your young teachers at school, and you're now talking about this gentleman who's actually enabled you to get your first instrument, and you are aged 14.
I
So
was young.
not
Yeah, I
only
was.
is that wonderful, but they must be seeing something in you too, Gary.
Yeah, like I said, like I was very serious. Like I just knew it from the very beginning. It wasn't like, you know how some kids, it's like, oh, well, let me just see if this kid is into it. Let me just see. No, it was like, no, this is it. Like I was no questions asked. I was set. Like I knew what I wanted to do from really young. Even, you know what? Even when I was 5, I remember, even before all of that, but my dad asked me, he said, Junior, what instrument do you want to play? And I said, the drums. And he said, okay, I'm gonna get you a drum set. He never got the drum set. But even from when I was 5, I knew that I wanted to play music, from when dad asked me that question. If he would have gotten that drum set, I think my life would have taken a different trajectory. I'm happy he didn't because
Okay, so we talked about the trauma. That was your second reason. Because what was the third reason? What was the third thing?
so New Orleans was when I really like explored my bass career at that time. And I remember when I'm there, I was like, I want to play, I want to be a session musician. And I remember sitting in with people, and I think that was my first real experience as a professional musician. And it basically taught me like, it's like, okay, this is what it takes. You know what I mean? You have to like do this, you have to do that, you have to dress like this, you have to hang out, you have to, like, you're not a child anymore. So like, well, you're kind of a kid, but yeah. But I transitioned from that. Was New Orleans was like my like, if New Orleans was like my transition into the adulthood, if you will, and into like being really doing this like as a career. What does it actually take? Yeah, they were just very supportive. But for me, I was just learning a lot. Like what does it mean to like play, to like be able to like as a bass player support everybody and put down that foundation, and like learning that and learning how to like communicate. And it was just like training wheels are coming off, and it's like, yeah, it was nice.
Okay, okay. So how do we then move from you there, you're in New Orleans, you start, I know, getting proper paid gigs then, don't you? You start moving around and doing more paid work. And then I think, to me, it seems like you suddenly find yourself in Europe. So what was that journey?
Well, in New Orleans, I had a bunch of mentors, and they taught me a lot. And like in university, like I would hang out with certain teachers, and we would just look at scores of like different composers, and they would introduce me to like different composers, and I would look at just studying different scores and understanding like, oh, okay, this is what this is. Like, oh, just really like learning, putting things together. So I had all these different influences. So in New Orleans, I played all different types of music, and then from the orchestral stuff to hip hop to straight ahead to traditional stuff. And I started doing these shows where like so I was doing electronic music. I'm gonna make this really quick. Doing electronic music, that didn't go so well. So as a response to like, because I put so much energy into this like electronic avant-garde hip hop kind of stuff, I felt that, I don't know, I felt that I was really hurt that I wasn't really accepted within like a certain scenes that I wanted to be accepted in. So, and I saw other people, I felt like they just had an easier time being accepted. And I was really bitter actually, and I was really hurt. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna write this cello suite. This is my first time like actually composing something in the sense of like like because I did a lot of electronic stuff, beats and stuff. But I composed this piece. I never wrote it out, but it was called the African American Cello Suite. And I had all these glorious plans of recording it, and but I never did. But I took. We'll get back to that. But then what happened was this guy B Mike. I was like, yo, I want to play this suite at your like studio, and he was like, uh, yeah, because it wasn't really it was only just like he wasn't really into it, to be honest. But he was like, man, you got to do something for the culture. He said, you have to combine. He said, I have this art gallery. He's a muralist, really brilliant. And he said, I'm not on like Royal Street or Charter Street or whatever. But he was like, I'm like kind of off to the side, you know? But I've created my own thing. I can attract a 60-year-old professor at something and a 19-year-old upstart rapper, and I can have them all in the same place because I have the complexity of like I'm doing this, but I'm also doing that, and it just works together. He said you have to do that with your music, and that's and he's and then that really stuck with me. I was like, that's very interesting.
So what was his job? What did you say he was at?
B Mike is a muralist. Like he's quite famous now. He like he did. There's a book that Will Smith just wrote. He did the cover for it.
Okay.
He does art. He's really brilliant. B Mike, Brandon Oldham's, yeah, and he painted this like projects, and like he had like Erica Badu come and DJ. He's like really established in the art community, but he taught me a lot of game back in the G. You know what I'm saying? Like he really like. So after that, I really started taking that beatboxing, playing the cello very seriously because he told me, he said, you need to like really do that. So then I organized this show to where I was solo cello. I had like dancers, poets, rappers, bounce up, like everybody. And I'm just playing my cello with my little chaos pads. And then I did that show. And then I did another show that I had a string trio. Same concept with different artists. And then
So who's paying for all of this? Are you is it are you getting the money because you're charging for the tickets,
well,
or is somebody
so
supporting
yeah,
you? Yeah.
tickets. I was sell it was ticketed events. This was my first. I didn't really know all these terms back then, but this was my first stab at being a producer.
Okay.
Like this was like a new thing. I didn't realize at the time, but those skills that I was developing would help me later in life. So all of a sudden, right before COVID, 2018, 19, I got this house. It was like a house. Like it wasn't a flat because I lived in flats the whole time. But I had like 2 bedrooms. It was a really nice place to where you could do shows there. So I started producing shows. Like I started developing my producing skills. Like I would do jam sessions every week. I would do big shows. I had tons of shows there. People, and this started to become like a meeting place for everyone to
Where
come
is this? Where are we?
to New Orleans.
Okay.
So this was like a meeting place, and like I would bring string quartets in, and like djembe. I would just combine all different types of like arts together, you know, and kind of put a different spin on different stuff. And it was like an avant-garde, but also like basically I was able to attract all these different types of people, from drug dealers to professors to like and all in between. It was basically like my dream coming true. So basically, when I got to England, like I didn't realize like all those things I was doing, those shows, how much it would help me. But then realizing like, okay, like that was like the beginning of another. It was like I was birthing another thing, you know. And now hindsight, I look back, say, oh wow, I see how it's like all connected.
Yes.
There may be something else I'm like developing. So coming here to England, I immediately got here. So 2018, I started writing A Story of a People Called Black. And but then in between then, George Floyd was murdered. And then you heard a few movements from Black Transcendental Suite.
Yes.
I composed that really quick actually. But the thing was like it's crazy. Like prior to that, I wasn't really writing. I mean, I wrote the African American cello suite, but I don't know. I came to England and then I started writing, recorded that, and then so before I came to England, my goals were to. I was very clear. I said I want to get the global talent visa, and I want to get Black Transcendental Suite recorded, and get funding to produce a story of a people called Black. And all those things came to pass, and the latter is in the works, which is so yeah, that's kind of
It is absolutely incredible, and the story is so huge. What I'm going to try and do is bring it into the focus of this event that you're actually putting on in Manchester on the 17th of June. And if we start just with the title, A Story of a People Called Black, I know what it means. What do you think it means?
well, to different people, I think it could mean a lot of different things because some people, like, I'm not Black, I'm this or I'm that. It's like a lot of people, Pan Africanist. I identify myself as a Pan Africanist. It's like we're Africans, you know what I mean? Um, but it's one of those titles that you can't really be mad at it because it's saying a story of a people called Black. So it's not like I'm saying I'm Black. Do I identify as being? I identify personally as being Black American culturally. That's just what it is. But you know, but for people who identify as being Black, it's like yeah, I'm Black. You know what I'm saying? So it's one of those titles that you can't really argue with it.
No, 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 you can't argue with it. I just wondered if there was um, a reason why
Yeah,
you'd
basically,
used it.
it started because so my ancestors were shipped across the Atlantic. So my first impression of it was like this is intended for Jamaicans, Caribbean people, Cubans, Black people, like South Americans, all those cats who were shipped across the Atlantic. It's like because in a sense I'm telling my story, but it's a story of the people called Black, which is really all of our stories. But then I really thought like, you know, Africans, they like when you look at the like link between Africans and like let's say uh Black people in South America, or man, we are like this, you know what I'm saying? But we're like they're over here and we're over here, but we're like the same people. We do a lot of the same things, and it's like that spirit is within all of us, and I mean, yeah, they beat us, they did all this, tried to destroy our culture, but man, like that spirit, it just transformed, and man, like it's still. So we're the same people, we're the same people.
How did you decide how you were going to tell this story?
Well, it started. The only way I can answer this is to say how it started. It started by being in Manchester and realizing that they call Manchester Cottonopolis, and so realizing that Manchester celebrates Cottonopolis, and understanding that if I'm from the south of the United States, my ancestors picked cotton. I have my lineage going back to the 1800s. I know those ancestors on my father's side, and then so being in Manchester, being a bit upset over kind of how Manchester is glorifying the past. Well, not all of Manchester, but parts of Manchester. They got this place in town called Cottonopolis, and the bumblebees. It's just like what Manchester was a beehive. All the workers working for the queen bee. And it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way, to be honest. Felt a bit uncomfortable because my ancestors picked that cotton that came here.
Have you seen all of the stuff? I'm sure you must have done over the last month or so. All of the stuff about Manchester and Cottonopolis, and the Guardian has been running a really informative series. Have you seen it, Gary? If you haven't, I will send you the link because you will love it. It basically talks about Manchester's part in this. and the part that they should play and do play and what needs to be done.
Yeah, they got Abraham Lincoln in the city center. I've been to that statue, and it's just kind of like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Why don't you? That was a gift from the states. I forgot what state and what person, but I just think the city could do better at um, like actually, like really, like let's tell this story right. Like what actually happened, and not just. But at the same time, the mill workers, they did sacrifice at a certain point for with the cotton famine.
Yes, they did. They did.
So I'm appreciating that as well. So it started with that, with that whole concept. And then I got deeper into my family's lineage, realizing, one of my ancestors, uh, they, so Alec and Betsy were born like in the early 1800s, like 1801, something like that. And then they purchased, after being enslaved, they purchased land, purchased like 50, 40 acres, something like that. They didn't do the sharecropping thing. And it's quite incredible, like for African Americans to own property after being enslaved. Like, because a lot of African Americans had to sharecrop, which isn't really a great situation. So that's something that I really value. But then, after they had a kid called Primus had a woman called Jane. And there's a story in the family. This isn't written down or documented that, but Primus was used to impregnate women in other plantations. He was a tall, handsome black man, and but Primus eventually left Jane and had 12 more kids with like another lady 20 miles down the road, 20, 30 down the road. And I'm just pulling up the list of movements. But then, so I have a lot of my history documented. So I was like, you know what? This is my story. You know what I'm saying? This is, and I take pride in my story. Like my, so my great grandmother's grandmother, basically, is an easy way to sort of understand that. My grandmother's grandmother, called Jane, was married to Primus, that Primus left. Um, After Primus left, Jane, on her own, single black woman, and unable to read, unable to write, purchased like 30 acres on her own. There's a movement dedicated to her and black women at large. So, and then after that, after I started to like, that started, and okay, and so basically, I'm working with this, co-producing the show with this woman called Isabella Cox, and she's a brilliant producer. Um, so she's given me a lot of perspective. She's from Manchester, and she's just a really brilliant woman. And so, in terms of this whole narrative, I've been working with her in terms of she's been doing a lot of help with the creative production of just like coming up with how this can flow, and so it's been like, but the music, and just like writing music and certain stuff I've had, and it just sort of made sense. Like I just heard it, like wow, that my spirit has been like writing this from this place, and I didn't realize it. Like Primus was, yeah, you could be doing stuff, you could be writing music, and you could feel it intuitively, but not know what it's about until it tells you what it's about. So Africa is the first movement, rhythm section. Basically, we're from Africa, but it starts with just drums, but then the harpist comes in the rhythm section, and it's a feeling of wow, it's like a distant memory almost for us, distant. Rebellion is next. It's like cats did rebel. There were tons of rebellions. People ain't just gonna be enslaved and just take it. People gonna fight. Then war, that's the fight. Primus, dedicated to my grandmother's grandfather, basically. That's basically talks about home. Pride talks about being proud of who we are. Ancestral prayer is the prayer that the ancestors prayed for their future generations. We are those prayers. Cottonopolis is the complexness of Manchester, and yeah, and also about my ancestors as well. Interlude to Black Swan is basically featuring a poet, um, um, and then yeah, we'll talk about the featured artists. And then Black Swan's dedicated to Black women. Okay, Black Swan is a complex movement, very complex. Because remember, let's go back. Remember, I told you we're going to get back to the African American Suite. Well, I wrote Black Swan 7 years ago.
It's so interesting that it's your history, and yet that history is bearing resonance with so many people, whether we know our full history or not, by the mere fact of either we're Black or we're in Manchester or our forebears have suffered or something of a similar nature. You know, you do have the advantage of knowing who you are. Identity is such a huge part of who and what we are as a people. And, you know, you also mentioned George Floyd. And I just wonder, you know, this telling of the story of slavery, and certainly through jazz, it's not new. Max Roach did it, Dizzy Gillespie did it, Duke Ellington has done it, Charles Mingus, you know, they've all, you know, had some, in inverted commas, if I say attempt, it sounds disrespectful because it's not an attempt. They're fantastic suites, all trying to share this story of who and what we are as a people. But the story of who and what we are as a people is the same story, Gary. It is a story of a subjugated people, a people who are made to feel less than, or a people who are made to feel like other by the nature of the color of their skin. So that's kind of the same story. And I think in all of this, and you mentioned George Floyd as well, and I think in all of this, this is the you know, the thing that kind of saddens me, if you like, in that throughout our journey, it is that same story, and it's a story where we're crying. This is why our music, I believe, this is why our music, our art, our style, everything is so special, because it's emanating from the heart and from the soul and deep from who and what we are and who and what our forebears were and are.
That's really beautiful. I feel
So
that.
is that it? Is that kind of it with you? Are you just saying, do you know what? I know, and this is how this translates to me musically, visually, artistically.
Right. Definitely. Definitely. All of that, you know. It's yeah, it's a story, but it's yeah, it's a lot of it's a big situation, to be honest, in terms of like the scope of it. Like it covers a lot of ground, if you know what I mean. Talks about loss and love and interlude to Black Swan, and Black Swan is dedicated to Black women, but specifically my grandmother's grandmother. She on her own was purchased like 38 or 20 acres of land, something like that, in the early 1900s.
Which is absolutely extraordinary. Can I come back to Primus and something that I think is really important, actually, Gary? You talked about him and the connection, and obviously, I know that I don't know however many levels removed, but
My grandmother's grandfather.
your grandmother's grandfather. Okay, so I don't know what that makes him to you, but
Great grand, great grand, great. I don't know. That's the best,
but
easiest way. Yeah.
but the interesting thing, there's him, and then there's also your grandmother. Both of them did something that was extraordinary at that time. They were, in inverted commas, business people. Now, I don't mean business people as such, but you say, now, Primus's story is sad. And this is what I really want to talk to you about, because you said that he went off to search work elsewhere. His job was impregnating women. He was, you said, married. What happens? This whole thing and this kind of the whole psyche around um, black men and baby mothers and the way that some men carry on with this practice these days is because in the days of slavery they weren't actually allowed to get married, and in the days of slavery that is kind of what they did. And Primus, I know you say he was very tall and very good looking, and and so
And
basically,
he had the features that
but he,
they had. He had the features that they wanted to breed, basically.
but he was used to breed more slaves, basically, wasn't he? That's Primus's job.
That's the story that has been passed down. It's not written down anywhere, but that's what that's what my great aunt told me.
Do you think that that does have something to do with the behaviour, in inverted commas, of some young black men, and indeed kind of the perception that you got black men going around breeding up women all over the place?
Well, black men are sexualized in a very, there's a lot of stereotypes about black men. Some of us embrace those stereotypes. Some of us might not embrace those stereotypes, but they are there. And I think that we are seen to be aggressive and like, all of these, maybe not well educated, maybe, maybe ignorant. We may seem to be like having a bunch of kids with a bunch of different women. And I think that in some cases it's true, in some cases it's not. Like I don't have any children, but I think that children are beautiful. By the way, I'm not saying children are bad,
Oh, no.
but I just think that it's crazy. Like this whole thing. Yeah, culturally, what is like left with us now? Like culturally, like how did these stereotypes come to be in existence? Obviously, it's to favor somebody. You know what I mean? These stereotypes work for somebody.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, I mean, I can't really answer that question. I can just talk about it and make observations. I'm not a scientist or a social whatever. But that is a very interesting thing that you just brought up, actually. Very interesting point.
Okay, and then on to your
Wow.
great grandmother being a businesswoman, and in that time being able to somehow buy her own land. Again, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, she couldn't read, she couldn't write. She and for a black woman, this isn't like the 1960s. This isn't this is before 1910, This is strong. She's in the American South. This is during a time where for a black person to a black family, let alone a black woman, to own anything. Like, yeah, it's you have to put it into that context. It was well before Martin Luther King was even thought of. You know what I mean? Marcus Garvey, yeah, but you know, he was in New York. You know what I'm saying? Like, Marcus Garvey was not in the South, like talking about it. You know what I'm saying? So it's different. I mean, yeah, he toured, but yeah, I mean, black people were seen as, you know, no one was saying black was beautiful back then. Black was ugly. Black woman was ugly. You know what I'm saying? They didn't have black baby dolls. You know what I'm saying? Like, so for my grandmother's grandma to, yeah, yeah, talking to you really helps me appreciate it even more. But it's crazy. Black Swan is one of those movements that I wrote a long time ago. And, you know, it was a pure movement. This movement is very, 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 very bold, very regal, and very proud, and very young. It's very noble. That's the word. It's very noble. But for a long time, I was like, am I just depicting Black women as bold and noble? How about soft? Like, and for I would say years, I didn't really realize. I said, nah, I didn't put that in the movement. Like musically, I didn't express that emotion until quite recently. I've been like sort of looking at the score and realizing it starts like this, goes here, and it ends very bold. But there's this middle part that if you're not paying attention, you may even miss it. You might not even realize it because things that come before it, but it goes into this very tender, very emotional, very soft part. So it's almost like I have it covered up to where like it starts regal and bold and yada, and then it ends, but and it's like covered up. You don't see it immediately. You have to be within the movement to like experience that side of it. And I said that's very I don't know. I mean, I just think that's very interesting because Black people at large, aggressive, loud, they stereotype us. And I'm not saying that we are, I'm saying that that's the stereotype. But in this music, it's bold, it's loud, it's commanding. But then when you listen to it, it sneaks up on you.
Do you know something? I think you have absolutely got the complexity, if you like, of the reality of the Black British experience there in a nutshell. You talk about when you were talking about Primus and you used, about talking and aggressive and angry. That is actually something that is leveled more towards women, Gary, than it is towards men. You know,
Definitely.
where I sort of come into this thing is it's almost like for us to have an opinion is almost an effrontery. Now, bear in mind, you've mentioned George Floyd. So we know what happened with George Floyd, and the whole world came together. And with one voice, we all said, enough is enough. And there was all sorts of promises made about how they're going to redress EDI because it was glaringly obvious what was going on when you started to look through, and it's not one aspect of life, it's all aspects of Black life in Britain today. We know that we fare worse. So George Floyd happened. It was horrendous, absolutely horrendous to witness the murder of somebody on television like that, 9 minutes 46 seconds, murdered like you would kill an animal. That's why it was also significant. And there's been all sorts of promises made, as you know, and all sorts of schemes are abounding about trying to basically give Black people a chance to, I would say, in inverted commas, a chance to, they call it like equality of opportunity, just to give them a chance to compete, to allow us in. So there's lots of different ways to do that. But we're not there yet, Gary. And, the thing about George Floyd was it was supposed to be the end of complicit silence. And we know that when you speak out, and I know because obviously it's something that I think that has happened with me, is you speak out and you are perceived as being a certain person or an activist or this, that, and the other. Now, is it a good thing or a bad thing to be perceived that way? I don't know. But there are consequences. There are actually consequences for speaking out. And so, therefore, you only get certain people speaking out. And art is a medium that actually allows you to ask those questions. It allows you to ask those questions, why and how. In, I'm not going to say an approachable way, but in a way that can tap into somebody's psyche in a different way. And I know it's an awful long lead into this question, Gary, but are you finding that the serious nature, if you like, of what it is that you're actually talking about in these different six movements are transmitted because of the media and better than if, say, for example, you were just to read it in a book, Black people suffered, or Mary suffered, or Prima suffered, or and did good?
I don't think of it as like, yeah, suffering is included, but anything that is great has complexity. It's a celebration. It's beautiful. When I think of a story people call Black, the production, I get really happy. I don't get like, oh man, a story people call Black, man, this is heavy. It's not heavy for me. I mean, maybe for other people it might be heavy, but for me, it's very light because it's like it's because think about it. So many people have died, maybe that haven't been able to tell their story. This is an opportunity to celebrate unity amongst all of us.
Have you written all of this? Have you written all the orchestral pieces as well?
Right. It took me what? At the end of 2019, so December at the end, basically from 2020 to basically, I just printed this out. This just got printed. So obviously,
Wow.
so yeah, I've been working on it for it's been years. It's been years, definitely it's been years.
How do you feel?
To be honest, to see the score look at me and to look at like I never really appreciated the work it took. I never really even understood it because it's something I love and it's something that you don't really think of it as like when you love something, it's like it's not even a thing. But to be honest, right? To pick this score up and to look at it as a piece like this is quite daunting. It's like, how in the heck did I do this? You don't really realize it when you're doing it, but reflecting on it like this is very very interesting.
Are you going to be conducting on the night?
Oh no, no.
So are you going to be playing?
There's a conductor called Sean Matthews. Okay, about what I'm going to be doing, I haven't really shared this with many people, but oh man, this is my first time publicly saying this. But the initial concept for this music, it was going to be a cello concerto, but I kind of got out of that idea because I don't really want, I just didn't want it to market it as like a cello concerto. I didn't want to use that like that definition. I wanted it to be ambiguous. I wanted it to be like I didn't want to put myself in that like highlighted position of like, oh, I'm playing a solo cello part. I wanted it to be like, okay, this is a story people call Black, and you come and it's featuring Woody Green, Yemi Balatiwa. Woody's MC, is rapping, and then and writing, and then Yemi is singing and writing lyricist as well, and Deborah is doing poems. But Deborah Black. But yeah, there's the big four movements are Primus, Cottonopolis, Black Swan, and Unity. Those I call them the big four. That is the meat and potatoes of a story people call Black. The other movements are important, obviously, but they are like the big movements. You know what I mean? They're like, yeah, those are the big movements. And I'm playing solo cello. I'm playing solo cello in those four movements. Now, I am playing in other movements as well, but there are some movements I just don't play in, like Pride, I don't play in. Spirit, I do play in. Outro, I don't play in. You know, there are a few movements I don't play. So some people may think of it as a cello concerto, but it's not really a cello concerto in the traditional sense.
And is that part of the whole thing for you to be part of the vibe, for you to be the part of the musicians who is making that music? Because basically you are making that is you're kind of making history. The performance is kind of making history in itself, isn't it?
Well, I guess we'll see when we'll see what time says, you know.
And is
I
this the first? This going to be the first performance on
world,
Saturday?
world premiere. And it's interesting, it's at the Naya because I heard the Naya was like the biggest Afro Caribbean place in Europe back in the day.
It was the first. Um, Yes, it was the first place it was described as a black-led arts organization. And I was involved with it back in the day then. So I know that near means purpose, and it's near, not Naya. And yeah, but it's now obviously near Moss and being taken over by a group of really dedicated and committed people. And once again, with the view to not, it being about them telling us what art is about, but about them facilitating and helping artists like you to put on events and tell your story. So yeah, it's kind of continuing, continuing the cycle. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
I knew that I wanted this to be. I mean, yeah, there's plenty of venues in Manchester, but first of all, I wanted this to be in Manchester, the premiere to be in Manchester, personally. In my mind, I couldn't see it any other way. We can go anywhere after this. We got to start in Manchester. And then within Manchester, I wanted it to be in Hume. Yes, definitely. Because I just feel like it just feels right. It just feels I remember I would go into the space, Nia, and I
Yeah.
would just walk on the stage and envision like like the players all lined up and and I would just like imagine it. It was just like, whoa, like I've envisioned this for like some years now.
Well,
And
the whole thing near means it's a Swahili word that means purpose. And your purpose is to come and tell your story of a people called Black. And
but it's our story.
I was just going to say, obviously, but what it does is it's our story, and it's not just our story, me as a Black person. It's our story as a people of the world, because I think this is something else that people have got to dig. When we start talking about Black issues aren't just Black issues
Right.
just for Black people. We're people of the world, and
Right.
globalization now makes that even more so apparent. So we're not this BAME or any of this other thing. We're a people of the world, and this stuff really matters. Something that I always say I'm upset about is the fact that Black people don't dig jazz, and I ask people why. Have you got any thoughts as to why we don't see Black people out there in the masses supporting the beautiful art form of jazz, jazzy hip hop?
I don't play. I don't know. I don't know. I don't play jazz, so I don't have anything to do with that.
Okay, so when you go out and you're playing to your audiences, what's the demographic makeup of your audience then?
Yeah, that's one thing we're really working on to get as many Black people as possible to come to this event because I do understand that it could be very whitewashed, like in terms of the audience. And I obviously want our colleagues and friends to come, but definitely I'm making it like I'm going tomorrow to this like Black Caribbean thing tomorrow and just meet with some elderly ladies, give some tickets away, and trying my best. We're really putting the effort in, and
Good.
and yeah. So hopefully, and I went to different events, African Liberation Day,
Yeah.
and like alongside, and just trying to spread the
Getting
word.
the word out. When you say whitewash though, Gary, I think that we should both be clear here. We're grateful for whatever audience is out there. But the
Definitely,
reality, the reality is, and I will talk about the gigs that I'm into. So music of Black origin, you're talking about 90% white audience, really.
yeah.
Um, and it's been that way, if not, and for jazz gigs, I'd say probably more like 98%
Well,
white audience. It's been that way for always, for 30 odd years,
I
Gary.
think when we say jazz, we should be clear what we're talking about. So when you say jazz, so
I'm
when
talking about any music. When I say music of a jazzy vibe, so I'm taking in neo soul, new soul, R&B, blues,
so that word jazz
soul, hip
is
hop, jazz, hip hop, the lot.
that word isn't a word that our ancestors ever really agreed with.
Hmm.
It's quite a. I use it sometimes to like just so I don't have to explain. But I call my music personally, I call it spirit music.
Yeah.
Because the spirit that is in all of us connects us. Jazz is that is not our music. That is like a gentrified version of what we have created. So like Louis Armstrong came and people took pieces of what he has done and called it jazz. But I don't make jazz. I mean, my music is can't be defined by like you can't really. I mean, I guess within this marketing situation, you have to like put things into boxes to make it simple for people to understand. But if you really want to talk about the craft, the art, like I don't really know what jazz is, to be honest. Now in terms of the audience, I think that yes, like listen, some of my I don't want people to like misconstrue into think that I'm anti-white because I'm not anti-white. Some of my best friends are white, you know. But anybody with a brain would know that whenever you go to a lot of different concerts or events, there's hardly black people there. Is it systemic? Is there a thing? Is there like, is it that black people feel like, is this a safe space for black people? And that's the thing. Like, I think there's a lot of components to it. I think that, I guess white supremacy is one of those things where like, it's insidious in many ways, and we might not think of it. Oh, it's just it's just not their thing. It's just not something that black people are into. But why is that? Like, why is that? I think it's it's something rooted like in this culture that like, and it's not just in England. This is in America as well.
I know. I mean, I find it bewildering, but I still do want to know the answer to the question.
I think I would argue and say respectfully, I would say that yes, we should embrace people who are there. I mean, we do that anyway, that's a given. But I think we have to also talk about okay, I'm gonna say this. When I went to African Liberation Day, I felt like I was home, man. I felt like it was a safe space. Like I felt, wow, I haven't felt that in a long time. Okay, you go to event, some event called Pi, I don't feel as safe. I feel like I'm the only black person here. I don't really feel comfortable. I feel like there's this thing, man, like as a black person, when you're in a space and you're the only black person there, that gets old, man. I can't lie. It gets very tiring. And it gets very because it's like, you know, I'm Black American, so my culture is like this, and then it's like it's this whole thing where I mean, we're forced to be in that situation very often. And it is hard sometimes, and all the times black people are like, man, we want to go someplace where it's like, I know I'm going to be comfortable. I'm not okay. Listen, I'm not saying me personally. I'm speaking as black people. I'm not speaking as Gary Washington.
No, no.
I'm speaking as black people and saying like, yeah, like so I think that, but so that's one aspect of it. Black people want to feel safe. They don't want to feel like people are judging them or looking at their locks and saying, "Oh man, are you a gangster?" Like I was at an event the other day. I'm not going to say no names, but I was talking to this. It was an all-white thing. I was talking to this guy, and I was like, "Yeah, what I'm saying, back in the G. Oh, what does back in the G mean?" And I'm like, "Oh, back in the day, He said, "Oh, my son, he talks black." And I'm like, okay, Cog's black. What does that mean? He's into all the gangster stuff and blah. And very, very quickly I realized like the thing is, man, when you're at when it's a lot of not all, I'm not saying some white people.
I'm just shaking my head and just going, here we go.
Like, the thing is like the thing with black people, we have our own culture, right? We have our own thing. We have our own, and some white people are a part of that culture. Some white people grew up alongside with black people, so they get it. But not all white people get it. Some white people, even though they may have not have grown up around black people, they just cool. They're like, yeah, man, I can appreciate other cultures and I can accept other cultures as an equal culture. But there's this subtle thing with white people when it's an all white event where they make it very obvious that they're above you. Black culture is gangster. Black culture, you know what I'm saying? It's like you very quickly put me in a box and say I'm black, so my accent, the way I'm talking. He said, yeah, my son talks black. I said, what does that mean? Like, what does talking black mean? And then he brought up the gay. I said, I'm black American. Black British is a different thing. Black, you know what I'm saying? There's so many different versions of black. But then he said gangster. And I was like, so that's what I'm saying. Like, the thing is, right? Yeah, you can say, oh, just embrace the crowd that's there. But at the same time, if you really go into it, if you're bringing black people in these spaces where they feel like they're treated like they're less than, they're not gonna come. So let's ask this question: why do we not put the energy to attract more black people? Why do we not try to make a space to where we make black people feel safe? Because it's like we're doing it in like the jobs. Oh, we have to have at least 3 black people to make us look like we're like equitable or whatever. You know what I'm saying? But I think like not even just black people. I think we need. I think we need to embrace other cultures as equals. You know what I mean? And I think that's the problem. Like white supremacy that is implanted. It's not something that people are conscious of. It's an unconscious thing that people don't even notice.
Well, it is. I mean, the whole sentence, I believe, is a nonsense. As equals, excuse me. Who ever said that we weren't? Who ever decided that we weren't equal? Why do we even adopt that phrase? Why do we even treat us as equals? What on it? No, we are equal. Where did that come from? That came from the same place as BAME came from. It came from the same place as ethnic minority came from. It came from the same place where over and over and over and over again, they call for reports into things that we already know the answers to and the results from. It's called, inherent structural racism. And that's what, we talk about George Floyd, but that's what all of these commitments and all of these promises, that's what they're supposed to be doing. Now, we're 3 years on, we've just passed the third anniversary. And you've got this marvelous, you've put, you are telling us our story, which is our story. So we've got something that is actually, making a statement, if you like. But where do you think we are as a people from 3 years ago, from when you and I first met? Because you know what you told me, Gary? You said the difference between America and the United Kingdom is you can get shot in America. That's what you told me the difference was to being black in the UK as to being black in America.
So you're asking.
I'm asking you, where are we 3 years on?
I think, to be honest, right? I think that I feel everything is it's more of a show. So people are more conscious of like showing that they're more. We're it's like a surface level, like it's like a band-aid, but we're putting band-aids over it. But I think, to be honest, this is my personal opinion. I've adopted more of a Pan-Africanist perspective from then to now. And I feel that as Black people, I would like us to like form our own like situations and support each other to the fullest and build ourselves up. I think that because you can't have true unity unless because the unity we have now it sort of puts us it's like it's not true unity when we're being offered a seat at their table. I think that true unity is having our own table and then their table is here and then you like okay let's do this. It's like oh okay like you know
Absolutely.
that's true unity. So I think for now coming together as Black people, Pan-Africanists, like whether you're from Nigeria, you're from Jamaica, you're from South America, we all come together. We put our resources together. We go in together, we love each other because I think that being enslaved has created a lot of self-hate, you know. And I've been learning stuff about myself that, wow, like I'm carrying this, I'm carrying it. You don't even really realize what you're carrying because self-hate manifests itself in many different ways. The way we treat our partners, the way we treat ourselves. First of all, the way we treat ourselves, then the way we treat our partners, the way we treat our kids. And I'm realizing there's some stuff that I want to unlearn that I'm consciously working on therapy and all of this stuff because we have generational traumas. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, Gary. Honestly, you and I, this is a conversation that we should stop and start again. One of the things that I do is I do the subject. One of my pet subjects is autism, ADHD, and obviously they're talking about trauma. After George Floyd, I went through a year of floundering in inverted commas, emotionally, mentally, physically. I was in absolute turmoil and didn't know why. So I was covering all of these stories. I was doing panel shows, I was doing interviews, I was, just doing news reports talking about what had happened, uh, and didn't understand what this thing was that was growing inside of me. And then it was explained to me at the end of the year by a wonderful lady called Olatunde Spence, who is an art psychotherapist. And she told me, she placed it all in context in terms of intergenerational um, trauma and black trauma and all this stuff about learned behavior. But it was the black trauma and understanding what it was that every single time I watched one of these films or heard one of these reports or listened to this song or whatever, the end result is the same, where black people were hurting, were crying, and it was causing incredible trauma
Yeah.
inside of me. So you're absolutely you are 100% on the button there
I
in
used to
terms of how important it is for us as a people
therapy.
to somehow. But also, and I'm not going to say in our defence. I think we talked about access and opportunity and having somebody on your side, and I think the problem is, Gary, is when you have so little, there is this fear, isn't there, that we feel we've got to hang on to what little bit that we've got, or we couldn't possibly bring somebody else in for fear of losing what we might get. It's pathetic, and we
Well,
do need to do more of this coming together and sharing together. But it's kind of okay. Let's use Gary's. Maybe we use Gary's event as stage one. Maybe
yeah,
that's stage one.
I think like it started with me where I would say, oh, I have like mommy issues, or I have daddy issues, or I'm like, oh, I have these issues from my parents, and then all of a sudden, like, wait a minute, I think it's deeper than just my parents. What did my parents go through? And then you read all this history, it's like, yo, oh man, like I am all of these people who came before me, like they are in me. So like I'm carrying all of that. So yeah, it may be, I think like, and not to say that we are only hurt and pain, like we got
Oh,
glorious,
of course, of course, of course.
but to say that like it's like okay, like the what is it, crabs in the barrel mentality, like that whole thing where like I got what I got and I don't want no, you know what I'm saying? Like, but at the same time, I do also believe that maybe that's a part of it, but I do think that like I don't know, can we imagine like imagine we just chilling and someone comes and takes your kid or takes you, takes me, puts me in chains, puts me on a boat. Half of the people around, well, a large percentage of people that are on that boat are gonna die, right? I'm in this new land. I'm never going back to Africa, ever, ever. My kids, I'm having kids. I'm separated from people that I love. And then you have to work. You ain't getting paid. You are property. You are not a human being. You are commodity. You're not human. You're spat on. Yeah, maybe you may have some owners of enslaved people, treating you well, like you're a part of the family, but it's like a dog. Dogs are treated nice. You know what I'm saying? And in some situations, you're not treated so nice. Some people run away, some people cry, some people may kill themselves, some people may kill their owners, you know? But and then to generations, like generations and generations and generations, and then you're freed. And then after you're freed, it's like, wait a minute, you're not human still. You have to be separate from us. You're not this, you're not that. And then you're gunned down by the police, and then you're this and you're that. So all of that. And then you look at other groups of people, other ethnicities, and how they can just come in situations and work together and just be prosperous and blah, blah, blah. Not to say that we haven't been prosperous, because to be honest, we have done a lot of beautiful things. But I think that, as you said, in our defense, man, like, I know my ancestors, like, I know there's a lot of healing I want to do. You know, there's a lot of healing. There's a lot of things I don't want to bring to the next generation. I know that. I'm just being honest with myself and saying that I know that for that. And I think that that is the problem. And I think that another problem is white supremacy. It's like, okay, say if we have been out of enslavement and then you come out of enslavement, but then say if white supremacy wasn't really a thing and it was like, okay, well, actually, let's like try to work with like, let's try to work with blacks and let's try to like, you know what I'm saying? Like, but no, that wasn't the case. It's like, no, you may be free, but you ain't really free. And that's the thing. Oh man, it really breaks my heart. Like, I don't know. I know, and some people call black is a celebration. That production is a celebration. But when I'm talking about the idea of Pan Africanism, from how I understand it, and the healing, and I don't know, when I went to that African Liberation Day, it really lit something in me. That was my first time attending in Manchester. I know they do it every year. They haven't done it during COVID. But it really lit something in me and made me realize like what we really need to do. And it starts with like, you know, everyone always says it starts with ourselves, you know, like I know for me, I'm trying to do my little bits. Am I doing the right thing? I don't know. I hope I'm making a difference in myself. But I got friends I talk to and just trying to get better, you know, had relationships with women, me personally, and made mistakes, feeling like, wow, I feel like maybe this is a pattern. So it's like, okay, let's analyze this and try to like go back and, okay, maybe I need to like deal with this. Or maybe, you know what I mean? Like, and it's like that, like, you know, it's some little things, man, like, but they're not little things. And that's me personally. I think them little things, like how we relate to each other. I don't know. I know I'm talking a lot, but I'm just very passionate about this because I know in my life I've seen how I made mistakes and I've seen how the mistakes that I've made has affected other people. And I've seen people make mistakes in regards to me, you know? But it's all love at the end of the day. It's like, look, we all learning out here, but I want to be better. I want to make it better for the next generation. So don't we all?
Well, absolutely. And I think that a story of a people called Black is starting to make things better for the next generation because at least it gives us, you know, let's use that as another marker. Let's use that as something for us to think upon and feast upon and use for food for thought. Obviously, Gary, it can't have escaped your notice that it's the 75th anniversary of Windrush this month on the 22nd. Any thoughts on the significance of that as an anniversary, as an adopted Mancunian?
Yeah, I feel like you know, it's crazy. Like I can speak more on Jamaican culture than I can speak on like any other cult culture in the UK in terms of like from the Caribbean. So I will speak on that. And I'll say that it's just such a small island, isn't it? Like it's like, you know, small island, but it's really kind of crazy how like how much influence Jamaican culture has like in the UK. Like it's really crazy. That's a very potent culture. That's very potent culture. Like, you know, and it's crazy, like so many people that I know, like, I don't know, and it's like, what, after the Second World War, right? And it seems like,
1948, 1948, Windrush
yeah. So
arrived.
I feel like it feels like, I mean, to be honest, that's not that long. That's not even really 100 years, right? But it feels like coming to the UK, like cats just been here. You know what I mean? Because cats are so embedded in the culture. It's like deeply rooted, like the
Well,
food.
I mean, there were black people in the UK before them, but they use Windrush as a marker because it was significant migration to the UK. So the 500 people on that ship. But people were here before then. My folks came here in 1955. And it's interesting for many years. I used to say, Windrush is not, my mum and dad didn't come on Windrush, so we're not Windrush. But actually, it's not. It's just for the marker in time, and it means significant immigration to the UK thereafter. But of course, they weren't only immigrating. They weren't just doing that. They weren't just as immigrants. They were invited, and this is where the problem starts, if you like. They were invited to come here as British citizens. So
Right.
my mum and dad came here, and my mum brought us up English. I wasn't brought up Black Gary. I was brought up English, and that's a different story for another time. I only started to understand the significance of that when I got into broadcasting. My life had been a white life. I'd lived in a white neighborhood. I'd gone to a white school. I worked in a white industry. My first husband was white. My second husband is white as well, for that matter. But there you go. It's not surprising. That is how I was brought up. They were my, whatever you want to call it. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I think yeah, it's just, I'm just astonished. Like, I know in the US, Black American culture, from the inception of the concept of when the land was stolen, we've been there. So it's like, obviously we're like rooted. So American culture is like kind of black culture, like that's what's exported is black culture. But in England, it's interesting. Like, I sort of see a lot of parallels between like how Caribbean culture is so entrenched here to where, even though I guess the markers you say it starts when the significant population started coming here, it seemed like it's paralleled. I'm just kind of astonished that like in 75 or 70 odd years that a culture can like just dominate, not just be implanted, but dominate. You know what I mean? That's like very, and that just goes to show you how rich our culture is. And you know what? They export that culture. Like, that culture is exported, and people making money from that. I mean, because it's like, as a these countries, it's like a soft power, isn't it, to have like culture, and it's like, it's just
Oh,
crazy. It's beautiful.
Gary, it's like you answer that question, and the comments that you've just made there would make a documentary in its own right. Because talking about funding and how money gets in and how money gets used and how what we all have to do to survive, you have survived. You are a survivor.
Well, it's an ongoing process.
But I mean, I'm talking about putting a slice of bread on your table, survival. You
Yeah,
know, there's an awful lot of people working in the arts for zero for a long time.
absolutely.
So to somehow turn that around,
It's
yeah, I think it's absolutely that's not you. You've come at it straight away. You've almost come at it running. You've identified what needed to be done and how it needed to be done, and you've done it. You've done it. You've got an orchestra. You've got a gig on the 17th of June. Sound a bit more excited, Mr. Washington, please.
10 days, 10 days. Well, 10, 12, 11, whatever. Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
Gary, thank you so much. That was wonderful. So there you go, a story of a people called Black, helping to unravel some of the complexities around race and identity, reimagined courtesy of Gary Washington, aka the Urban Cellist, sharing his history, a collective history of people from the African diaspora and beyond. But what say you? I want to know what you think. So it's now for the important bit, which is you. Thank you for taking the time to listen. And it's so obvious, we have got so much to explore. And we're doing it with a swing, with meaningful content. Thank you, Oscar Brown Jr. And you cannot afford to miss a beat. So press that button and subscribe to this monthly podcast and join me as I meet the undisputed music legends and share their secrets to success and longevity just with you. And if this hits your groove, I also want you to send up your love and then press that button again and share the news with your peeps, because this is living history in the making, folks. Until the next time.